let you guys know some stuff before we get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If folks come in as we go along, we will add them to our group. I wanted to let those of you who don't know who CPAC is know a little bit more about who we are. We're Connecticut's Parent Training and Information Center under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we're staffed by parents of children with disabilities. Our goal is to support families of children from birth to 26 who have disabilities or chronic illness. And our philosophy is that all families will have the confidence, knowledge, and understanding they need to effectively advocate for their children and to partner with professionals to ensure that children and youth grow and learn to their full potential. It's really important that people understand we are a collaborative group. That is our goal. We are recording this and we will be posting it to YouTube. We would appreciate it if folks stay muted unless it's time to do you want to ask a question? We will hope to have extra time for questions in the end. And so if so, please type your questions in the chat. And if you want to type in Spanish, Melania will translate for us. Remember that this is not a private call. This is a public call, and so please be thoughtful about the things you might share about your child. And if you have very personal questions, we would love to have an individual conversation with you at CPAC to address your individual questions. So for the group, if you can keep them more group focused, that would be helpful. And I'm going to introduce our Dr. Andre Bissett, who is joining us today to speak about anxiety, and he's going to tell us more.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate it and love and appreciate all that CPAC has done and does. And I've had a number of occasions to, and the pleasure and the honor to collaborate with CPAC and folks connected with CPAC as well. I'm Andre Bissett. I'm a clinical psychologist up here in the far northeastern corner of Connecticut at Day Kimball Hospital. I'm the clinical director of the Outpatient Behavioral Health Program. Specifically, I am a child and adolescent clinician, and I like to say that I work with kids from the age of about 5 to about 76. 76 is my eldest client, but I specialize in working with kids on the autism spectrum, on the anxiety spectrum, OCD, with a range of neurobehavioral issues, with parents, with organizations, schools, and in particular, over the past few years, I've come to take a particular interest in working with transition age individuals on the spectrum, or with a range of challenges between the ages of, let's say, 18 and your upper range, Jane, around 26. Because of the paucity, the lack of resources that exist in our state specifically for these individuals. So I was honored to be asked to do this and talk a little bit about anxiety. I know that it sounds like a broad topic, and I will put in a disclaimer here, or a kind of a cautionary note, that yes, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Have been practicing for over 2 decades across the country in a number of different therapeutic schools, clinical settings, hospitals, whatnot. But please understand that anything that I say today, it should not be construed as direct clinical advice or guidance, because none of us, as far as I know, has a formal clinical rapport or relationship. If you have any specific questions about your child, children, kids you care for, please direct it to CPAC or to their clinician, or I would encourage you to engage a therapist, clinician, to address those issues. And I hope that's clear. It's not meant to evade or be vague about anything, but I can't speak specifically to any one person's challenges, although I'm sure, and Jen, you can tell me if I'm appropriate in saying this, but as we go along and talk about stuff, if you need to raise your hand on Zoom, those little yellow hands that you can put up, I have no problem, because I'd like this to be somewhat conversational. I understand that I have a an organized presentation here. And this is a presentation I've done for several years, and I tailor it to different organizations. I'd like to be as agile and responsive to whatever the needs are of your specific demographic, your area, your specific needs.
That would be fine. My only caveat is that as I'm sharing the screen, I can't see the hands, so you may have to monitor that. Okay, great.
That's fine. So I'm gonna see that. Okay, and that being said, what I'd like to do is go through some of these slides, and I'm not going to be reading through them. I'm going to paraphrase them or just touch on them briefly. We may skip over some to get to the meatier and more relevant parts of what I want to get to, because specifically we want to talk about, and the title is Epidemic Upon Pandemic. I should have switched that around a little bit. I should have said it's a kind of pandemic upon epidemic, because anxiety is an inescapable and undeniable human state of experience that we all experience. No one does not experience it. It's a question of whether, to what extent we experience this as overwhelming and distressing, and to what extent it becomes adaptive. Most of us deal with on a day-to-day basis, and our kids, adaptive levels of anxiety. I can say that going into any presentation, any kind of work situation, professional, whatever, I experience what I call adaptive anxiety, which is arousal, which is physiological and mental arousal, emotional arousal that helps me and helps all of us perform and do the things we need to do. When that runs out of control and runs unbridled, and we start to ruminate and become agitated, jittery, sweaty, distracted, then we say that the anxiety is then becoming an issue. But we need to, the anxiety has served an adaptive and a very essential function in our survival as human beings. It's kept us free from threat, it's kept us alive. But these days, and if you could go to slide number 2, and if I'm going too fast, Melania, just let me know. We're going to go to slide number 3.
Yeah,
but you know what? Let's stay here. I want to stay here.
I've already clicked the button, so we'll see. But you can start here and see if
it's beautiful. So you can see for yourselves, some adaptive and maladaptive, which means not so functional forms of anxiety or functioning anxiety, right? Helps us survive, helps us adapt, helps us to adjust to our surrounding, inspires us, motivates us. On the negative end, and we're starting to see a lot of this in ourselves, and I'm going to touch on this a lot, as caregivers, as teachers, as professionals, as stakeholders, as people who care about kids, who care for kids. We're in step with them during this COVID-19 crisis, because we're all experiencing this. So the maladaptive aspects of this that you're probably all familiar with, avoidance, social withdrawal, panic. I didn't put that in there. It can lead us to become unhealthily competitive and resentful, sometimes too much self-sacrificing, avoidant, as I said, and anger. Actually, I have to right now draw the connection between anxiety and anger. Anger is not really a primary emotion. There is a level of processing and kind of deliberation as quick as we go through it. That really is born out of anxiety. In the animal kingdom, when an animal feels threatened, it's the fight, flight, or freeze. For us, we have a unique way of kind of fighting, fleeing, or freezing, and we do that with our words. We do that in how we interact socially, and for a lot of us, we show anger. That's how we keep people at bay. That's how we manage the threat. That's how we avoid further negative consequences. Although I would argue, in the long run, an undisciplined show of anger can be not very helpful, as we try to impart that to our kids, right? So anxiety and anger, especially when we feel helpless, hopeless, we feel that we cannot control things. We kind of, we direct our anger inward, outward, toward a perceived perpetrator, a cause to the anxiety. And that's, I think, what we're running into some difficulty with, especially with COVID, because guess what? There's really no identifiable perpetrator, right? Although people have tried to find one or two, that is something I'll get to later with regard to how the media and how we ourselves have tried to explain this, because we try to manage our own anxiety by trying to intellectually, like in our brains, explain, oh yeah, this is what's happening. We try to make sense of it. We can't always do that, especially in this very unique situation with COVID-19. So if we could we go to slide number 4, and I might fly through some of these, right? So if we go to the next one, which is slide number 4, with the blue banner at the top, it's going to say what,
you know, what moving very slowly. I'm not sure what the problem is. I'm going
That's fine. You know, okay. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. There's a physiological piece of anxiety, what we feel in our bodies, and the intellectual piece. Now, in my line of work, we've been very good at addressing kind of the beliefs, the cognitions, right? The thoughts, whether they're rational or irrational about anxiety. One thing as a profession we haven't been great with is helping people manage, without medication ideally, helping people manage a lot of those physical symptoms that then cause us, we kind of read those symptoms to really react to situations in not such a great way. And we see that in ourselves right now with COVID-19. We see that in our kids. A lot of us are short-tempered. We're running out of patience. We're burnt out. We're tired. We have COVID fatigue. We wonder, is this ever going to get any better? Some of us are saying, we try to convince ourselves, absolutely. We're going to get back to normal. You just wait. And boy, do we deserve a break. We deserve to get back to normal. Well, folks, I'm going to tell you right now, I would caution you to not get caught up in the idea of who deserves what, because that never really leads anywhere good. So let's go on to number 5. And if you can, and I have, this is one of my favorite ones. We talk about primitive threat for thousands of years, and what we now perceive as threat. As you can, you'll see it pop up momentarily. And the captions are these look like kind of Neanderthal individuals trying to keep a bear at bay with their spears, which would be seen as a very real threat to their way of life and to their lives. And then on the right, we'll get there. On the right, we have.
Yeah, I'm going to reshare and see if that will make it move a little bit.
Not a problem. So we have two visuals which are very interesting. You'll see at some point. I don't have a bunch of them, so we don't have to rely on them. And then we have a more modern version of what our concerns or worries or anxieties are around, and it's my shampoo and conditioner never run out at the same time. You know, we always, we tend to think that that's a big deal. Or, you know, where's my iPhone charger? Who drank the last bit of milk? Okay. So that's always very interesting. And so the things that we're left with from evolution, we're left with our ability to react to situations with this physiological arousal, right? We get kind of keyed up, we get angry, we get ready for a conflict, we get ready to defend ourselves. But the reasons we do it these days, because we have less and less threats to our existence compared with 100, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, are becoming a little bit, and I'll say this, a little bit more trivial, okay? So when we get to, so that's still on the screen, that's fine. So not a big deal. We're going to jump ahead a little bit.
Let's try to do that before I share. How about that?
Yes, I will do that.
To go to?
Well, I'll tell you, let's throw a dart at this one. And let's say we are, okay, we're going to go right to, because we're at 20 past, oh, you know what I'm going to do? Let's go to number 10, and then we're going to go 10, 11. We're going to try to go in order, Jake, right? So let's
Okay.
go to 10.
I advanced it to 10 before I'm sharing. So
beautiful.
That will
right
get us there.
And so oh, there we go. Beautiful. And I talked about fight, flight, or freeze because these are things that none of us are immune to this. We all experience this. So I'm not talking to a very narrow band of folks here. We all have been in situations where when we feel threatened or under pressure, we fight back or we talk back. We either, or we, the second blue bar, we want to flee the situation. We want to avoid it. We want to get the heck out of there. Or we freeze, we panic. We're just kind of left to sit in our own, we call this like physiological stew. We have all these neurotransmitters and stress hormones that build up in us, and we're just kind of stuck there. So let me take a pause for a moment and say this, okay? Give you a little bit of background. So here I am as a clinician, as a psychologist, but I'm also speaking to you today as, I wear different hats, as you can imagine. I am the father of 3 kids. I have a 22-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 14-year-old, all very differently wired. My 14-year-old is my spirited, strong-willed, single-minded kid that I could reference a number of times here, and there's a lot of kids who very easily get into this threat response zone when we have our sympathetic nervous system triggered. The more easily someone perceives threat, and this is where the mental piece comes in, the more readily, the more quickly we jump into this, okay, it's fight, flight, or freeze time. And that is exactly what COVID-19 has presented us and our kids. And I say us and our kids because, and I'll mention this later, is that, you know, in normal circumstances, we kind of, well, normal, whatever's normal now, right? We're looked to as leaders, mentors, parents, authority figures, and children, or those who are have needs in specific areas, really look to us for leadership, for protection, for guidance. And guess what? Yeah, we try to give it to them, but here, you know, with the reality of COVID-19, we're experiencing exactly what our kids, our students, children are experiencing. But at the same time, we are relied upon to give them support, validation, and a sense of security and safety. And that's not always so easy, as you can imagine. I mean, let's look at what COVID-19 has presented to us. Let's go to the next slide. And I apologize, it's number 11. And I apologize for the overlap of the title. I thought I was getting this correct here, right? And that is, okay, so and just when we think it was safe to venture out again, for those of us, you know, I'm speaking to those of us who, you know, we tend to be a little self-protective and maybe, you know, whatever. Along comes COVID-19. So here's what we're presented with. And hopefully people can read along with this. And I'm just going to go through this. So this sense of like we experience and express in response to any perceived threat. You know, the most notable that comes along is, if any of us are old enough to have been around for 9/11, it was a horrific and tragic set of events, but it was very focal in the sense that it had we didn't know at the time, but it had a very specific, kind of a specific area, specific time frame. Over time, we knew who perpetrated it, how they were doing it, and there was a response to it, right? This is very different. So along comes COVID-19. We start to hear about this variant of this virus, and there's this growing sense of shock, disbelief, threat, vulnerability, being overwhelmed, and eventually helplessness, because there is no cure presented. There is no immunity profile that's clear. We're initially told that kids don't get it as easily, but that's kind of debunked. Kids can get it, but are less symptomatic, and so they can carry it and infect others unwittingly. Then, as in how we get our information, the media, and now the media is very different than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, when you're sitting watching TV on one of 20 channels, you kind of get pretty much the same coverage of news. These days, it's really politicized and quite divergent. You switch to one channel, you hear one line of thinking, one theory. You switch to another channel, you hear a different one. So we have constant media coverage, kind of worsened by these short kind of graphic news cycle. Our news cycle now is what, like an hour? It used to be like 2-3 days, right, or a day. Back in the day, I don't want to mention my age, but back when I was growing, I grew up with Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and the news cycle was pretty much whatever you heard one day at the 5 or 6 o'clock news, you'd hear the same thing the next day. Nothing would change, right? But now we were just constantly just hammered by all this information. And I think it, for a time, and it still has, kind of brought out not the best in a lot of us when it comes to our natural instinct to try to protect ourselves and to try to explain to ourselves and to each other, to our kids, gee, why is this happening? Because we naturally try to find a perpetrator. Look at number 3. We look for a cause. We look for a perpetrator, someone who is we look for the evil being who caused all of this. But unlike many threats we faced in the past, right, we don't have one. The closest we come is when there's a natural disaster and it's just nature that sends in like a tornado or a hurricane or something like that. So COVID-19 has really presented some very challenging set of circumstances. And here's the tough thing, is that there's not a real end in sight. Yes, a quarter of the United States is vaccinated, but we're still vulnerable. There's 3/4 of the United States that is still quite vulnerable. Over 500,000 people have died, and that's very apparent to us and to our kids who are consuming the news as well, right? So we all remember, we kind of hunkered down. We went out to the store. I hope none of you did this, gone out and buy like 5 cases of toilet paper, and you probably still have 4 of them left. Getting PPE supplies, all that, doomsday prepping, baking, knitting, again, in an attempt to try to convince ourselves, and it works to an extent, that we are doing what we can to keep ourselves safe and to manage our anxiety and to model for our kids that, hey, we got this handled. Okay, we got this handled. Well, as best we can. But the reality is we don't have really any more answers for our kids than they can get themselves. However, I'll touch on that in a little bit. I want to take a pause here because we're at 12:30 almost. And I don't want to just read through this. I want to, Jane, I want to know if you or anyone else has a specific question thus far about some of the background. Now I'm getting into the nitty gritty of the COVID-19 stuff, and then what we can do, really what we can do to really try to be as resilient and hardy and healthy throughout this whole thing ongoing, because the end, there really is no end in sight to this at this point. So I'm wondering, I want to see if you have any specific questions. I'm going to look here. Let's see. I don't see anyone raising their hand.
I don't see any chats and
okay.
Than millennia, and I don't see any questions. I think that, to be honest, I think that you're heading in the direction people are waiting to hear. So
yes, exactly.
More,
okay,
yeah.
So you guys have, we all know the background of this. I'm trying to give you another lens to look at it through, right? And just to kind of reiterate, and I'll go over the last point of this. So all the while, our children see and experience what we've been experiencing. They look for our lead, but in reality, we're kind of on no better footing than they are, except that we have the benefit of a few decades of experience. And it's difficult to be role models for them. So that outlines kind of one of the things we're looking to do, right? When we talked about, okay, where do we go with this? How do we support, guide, protect our kids, and still help them on their developmental path, right? So let's go to slide number 12. Okay, oopsie daisy.
So Dr. Bissett, one thing that I think parents are faced with right now is most schools are offering in-person instruction. And parents who have kids with anxiety in particular, or parents with anxiety, are struggling. Like you said, we don't know more than our kids do. So how do we make a decision about sending our kids back to school? That's I know, one of the questions that we get, given the anxiety that may produce in the student or the family.
Okay, well, that's an excellent question, and I kind of hint at this, but again, as a social scientist and as a person of science, I really want to bring it back to what our medical authorities are saying. And schools should be in step with them, that if there is but again, it comes down to, I understand that parents have the discretion to say, okay, you know what, that may be the case, but I'm still not comfortable in my gut with this. But I really would implore folks and encourage folks to get information from credible sources, the WHO, the CDC, from our local Northeast, the District of Health, because there's some local districts of health, as to what is a reasonable path for this. I would like to think that schools would not be going back into or offering face-to-face unless there were some reasonable assurances and safeguards. However, we also know, and we experienced this up here early on, but hopefully this will not happen again, that there are individuals who make not very good choices. So you could have a bunch of kids coming back to school, all sorts of precautions, social distancing, they're in cohorts, they're hybrid learning, they try to break them up into different pods. But there are some folks, and this is where I started talking about this deservingness thing, some folks who are so intent upon getting back to normal that they take shortcuts, they're not being careful, they send their kid to school, there's an exposure, and then it exposes everyone. Now that could happen anytime. That could happen now, that could happen 5 months down the road when we're talking about starting back up in September. But I always, and again, this is because I think the medical advice is leaning us in this direction. I think we need to start thinking about, for the sake of our kids' normal psychosocial development, but also I think school districts and districts of health and medical professionals have been very good about outlining this. I think we need to start leaning into going back to school. Now, I know everyone has a different set of circumstances. I personally work with several families that have some medically fragile members, and so they're cautious. Not everyone's going to go back, but I think barring that, it's important to start talking to the professionals to see, the medical professionals to see is, okay, is it a reasonable thing to be going back? And I think at this point, it's all indicators are pointing in that direction that it is, right? So hopefully that's answered your question. And for our kids, like this thing says, and this little visual I have here, this is off of the inside of the hull of the Block Island Ferry. And everyone gets a kick out of this because they don't know what to make of it. It's like, okay, a general alarm, when bell rings, go to your station. It's probably as clear as any direction that people have gotten, early on in this, right? It's like, where did we go? What do we do? Who's station, right? What the heck is going on here? And, as I say here, social distancing means different things to different people. We've had a lot of limits on what we can do. And here's one of the challenging things, because when I get to, and right now I'm going to get to it, it is so important now that things are starting to open up a little bit. To an extent, we have a certain percentage occupancy we can have in sports and in certain venues. In terms of what we know is good medicines, so to speak, for anxiety, is kind of active engagement, participation. And when I say active engagement, where we're physiologically active. So where we once had no or limited sports, arts, community activities, field trips, dances, things like that. They're starting to open back up, but we still have to get very creative with that. And I talk in a little bit about needing to get creatively collaborative with our friends, our family, to an extent, whatever extent is deemed safe according to COVID guidelines, to really provide a lot of those opportunities, and what I call in general mentoring, because here we are now, 13 months after starting the quarantining and the kind of the COVID-19 protocol of social distancing and staying at home and limiting workplace visitation. And who are the people that our kids have had most contact with? I mean, that's the question I want to put out there. Can anyone tell me, and I think it's pretty obvious, who are the people, the adults, that our kids have had most contact with over the last 13 months?
You can unmute yourself to answer.
Yeah.
Who have your kids had the most contact with?
Me and my husband, just parents at home.
Okay, so Vanessa, how's that worked out for you?
Well, in some areas good, some areas not good.
Yeah, and I would venture to say that if that's your answer, the people coming through my door, 90% of them have said, this year has sucked, get me out of this. I did not sign up for this. I'm not signed up to be my kid's teacher or PE teacher or tutor. And as much as we love our kids and we've committed to caring for them, we are the main authority figure, teacher, mentor, role models that our kids have had over the past 13 months. Now, there are some exceptions. Some kids have been able to play a few sports. Some kids have had virtual music lessons. But at the end of the day, we're the ones saying, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. And I can tell you, as the parent of a 14-year-old, this has been kind of hell on earth. This has been very difficult because at some point, our kids burn out on our voice, on our authority style, on our teaching, on our guidance. And we desperately, this is a very important thing to note, and I'll get to this in a little bit. We desperately need to start to collaborate and expose them, and especially as things open up a little bit more, expose them to other sources of leadership, of guidance, coaching, support. Absolutely crucial. They need to hear from us less and be able to have more contact with folks that are trustworthy in the environment, our environments, our communities that they've always had contact with. I'll give you an example. I use my kid as an example, but I dispense this advice and guidance to all of my clients. I'm like, talk to grandparents. Again, assuming you've got to make sure that it's safe. Coaches, music teacher, anyone that we're starting to have contact with. I've had parents enlist the support of a community friend to come in and spend like 2 hours with the kid just to give them a break from the parents and to say that, okay, here I am as an adult in the community, I'm going to come in and spend some time with you. And oh, and by the way, yeah, I'm not going to tell you anything differently than your parents have, but it's going to come from a different person. That is worth its weight in gold, right? So that informal mentoring and guidance, that it does take a village, absolutely. And we're seeing that starkly. We're seeing that very clearly right now. So if there's one thing amongst many that I can encourage all of you to do is don't take it upon yourself to continue to be the only voice of authority, direction, coaching for your kids. Really start to think creatively about having them have contact with some other folks within reason, of course. Obviously, we want to stay safe. But thank you, Vanessa, for kind of, coming forward, because 90% of the people have not had a good time with this, have found this supremely frustrating and daunting. Only 10%, if that, have said, well, it's been okay, because their kid uniquely can do fine from a distance, or they're kind of self-motivated and they do okay with being a little more isolated.
Dr. Bessette, I'd like to share one story about my son based on what you just said, which was kind of revealing to me. So my son is 31 who has autism and intellectual disability, and mom has been the primary, provider. He does go to work, so he does have somebody every day that can be that adult authority figure, but at home there's a lot of time. And the other day I had somebody come and care for him because I wasn't able. And she's a friend of the family, and he was such a different person after she left. He was like, because it was at home, it was not the same as the work authority, it was the home authority. And he was so happy to see me, and the change was remarkable. And I think it's exactly because of what you're saying. He needed a different person to give him the same directions I give him every day.
Absolutely. Jen, you bring up a great point. And if I could say this 17 times in a row, I would say it 17 times in a row between, and I've been asked to do the same thing, not as a professional, but as a coach. I coach ice hockey, and one of the parents came up to me and said, "Oh, when you get a chance, can you take my son aside and just kind of see how he's doing and say that?" And didn't tell me what to say, but you know what? I kind of knew what to say. And we all need to do that for each other, and more than you think, right? Way more than we think. But Jen, you bring up a great point. All it takes is an hour, 2 hours, even less, a simple chat with someone, with a different person. And that can make a huge difference, Can we go very quickly to slide number 13, because I want to show some folks a parallel here. And sorry, I should have given you, oh, good, you got it up. So here we go. So let's pretend you don't see the right side of this. So what are the hallmarks of trauma, right? The things that really make trauma as terrible as it is: real or perceived threat, lack of predictability, lack of control, vague, unidentifiable cause, unclear end or mitigation of the threat, and a sense of helplessness and vulnerability. Let's look over to the right and what COVID-19 has presented us. Guess what? It's the same stuff. This is not easy to deal with, right? Same stuff. I just kind of copied and pasted, by the way, but put it in red so it makes it look very important. Same stuff. So, and we kind of lose track of it because we're all in it together, and it's not like, we're kind of, I know a lot of people who feel a little guilty saying anything about, well, yeah, I think this COVID thing's really wearing on me, because we know that, hey, it's wearing on them too. So we don't say anything. But I think it's important, again, to get together and to be once in a while, a little reasonable venting is not so bad, as long as we, again, start to think about, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do with what we have? And we started talking about that. And very quickly, can we go to 14? And I just want to say, the one thing we definitely don't want to do is try to avoid, okay? Because avoidance is essentially negative reinforcement. No, negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative reinforcement is the removal of an icky feeling, and lots of things can do that. Avoidance does that. Drugs and alcohol do that. Just kind of escaping a situation, and all that does is kind of make it worse in the long runs, and it's very addictive. And so what we want to do is, here's the mantra. The mantra is engagement above avoidance. Now, there are certain things, we want to avoid, we'll put off, fine. We want to prioritize, we want to triage, but it's engagement. Any opportunity to kind of engage versus avoid or pretend a certain situation doesn't exist is very, very important, because avoidance is quite addictive. And that's exactly, if anyone is familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder, that's one of the major problems with the compulsions, is that it serves to avoid kind of engaging in whatever the obsession is, and to extinguish it. Okay, so here is number 15, right? Number 15. So what can we do? We've already started talking about a lot of this, right? What can we do? Okay, there we go. So, again, supporting our kids in in keeping them meaningfully engaged in activities and things that are starting to become available again. And I will say, and I don't want to make any assumptions here about folks' ability to afford or pay for some of these, but a lot of things that kids are involved in cost, do have a fee associated with it. But I do know that at least up here in the Northeast in Connecticut and in other regions as well, we're Region 3, I believe, there are organizations that fundraise specifically to help people afford essential community and sport type active activities. So please be, maybe CPAC might be able to identify some of those, or your local youth authority.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but those are very, up here we have an organization called NOW, which is Northeast Opportunities for Wellness. And they cover things from martial arts to dance to baseball to hockey. So try not to have cost be a deterrent. Try to find a way, and there are organizations that can help. Very important. So engagement over being stagnant or avoiding. However, again, it's important to have some balance between being busy and we want to have some mindful time and some downtime, important. But I think one of the challenges that we've run into, and people may be able to relate to this, is along with the technology that we've been given, our kids have been given to facilitate their distance learning, they're now spending not only class time on their technology, but then when they're not on their technology, or some of them are actually playing games and are on YouTube when they should actually be on in class, they then go right from sitting at their desk on their Chromebook to in their bed with their phone and their computer. So we really want to be very careful of that self-isolation and try to get kids out and meaningfully engaged. Okay, again, having these activities be physically oriented. And guess what? All of this guidance that you see here, we're going to, over the next 2 pages or 3 or so, we also need to take for ourselves as caregivers, as teachers, as professionals. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't recharge our batteries, refill our well, we will not be any use to our kids. We will not be of any use to them whatsoever. Again, be mindful of the excessive use of social media. Any opportunity to, again, get together around the dinner table and have some variation from their normal means of interaction throughout the day. You know, more kids are going back to school now, but there's still some hybrid and distance learning. Helping our kids distinguish between what a daily hassle and a true crisis is, very important. And again, we can just ask the questions. There's amazing power in asking questions. Oh, you know, is that kind of a mountain or a molehill? Is that a hassle, or is that a crisis, right? And again, helping our kids and us be able to tolerate a certain amount of distress. This is a distressing time, and it's not going to get a heck of a lot easier anytime soon.
But I'm hearing that you're saying that for any anxiety-producing issue,
absolutely,
this is the same information, is to play through and understanding the difference. I see this a lot in schools now, is really helping children to assess the size of the problem. That's become a really common, well, in good programs where it's happening, it's been, I think, a very successful intervention with kids to really differentiate between, is this ongoing or is this a momentary glitch or a momentary blip?
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions on how we help them to play through? I mean, part of it is identifying the size of the problem, but if it's a challenge that truly is a challenge for them, you know, how do we encourage them to play through?
Well, you know, it's about approaching things in reasonable chunks and reasonable tasks. It's not about implosion or kind of, you know, it's like analogy I'll use. You don't just push someone in the deep end of the pool, right? You can kind of introduce them to the shallower end, and as they get more comfortable and develop a sense of achievement and mastery and accomplishment, They kind of are able to kind of self-expose, self-engage in a lot of these things. One of the biggest things that we run into is because of this, of how long this has gone on and how kind of oppressive it's been, just how gnawing and oppressive and heavy it's been. A lot of kids and adults for that matter, are feeling this sense of helplessness and loss of motivation and apathy. And so they don't have a lot of energy to play through, so to speak. But it kind of starts with us where we say, okay, you know what? We've had to play through some things. We have to pull upon our several decades of wisdom as parents, caregivers, adults. Some of us are foster parents, and say, okay, we need to model for our kids that, yeah, there's a day when we could have easily stayed home from work or not gone out for a workout or not done this or that, but we did. And let's try to do something. And one way to do that is to do something like that with them together. If there's a little bit of social anxiety, I have a daughter who's, incredibly capable kid, but it's a chore for her to go up and order a frappuccino at whoever makes frappuccinos, right? But doing that with them, driving up with them to do that, going out to the store with them, going to do something with them, maybe as the gyms open up or going on a hike, doing something like that with them. And then kind of, you're going to be able to see that they'll be able to do that on their own, right? So it really does start with us. Yes, we have there's a little bit more burden on us as elders, as adults, parents, caregivers. But yeah, we have to give it to them in manageable chunks. The whole kind of like, suck it up, buttercup, just face it. It's not that easy. We can say it is, but, or getting our kid back, a lot of kids physically have been not active. And so they're not quick to want to go back out on the soccer pitch or on the baseball field or whatever. But guess what? Everyone's in the same boat, but being able to kind of encourage them to do that and get out there with them is very important.
Modeling is what you're really saying.
Exactly. Yeah, modeling, but also you bring up a good point. Is you asked, how do we know if this is a kind of a unique situation or how big the issue is? The bottom line is knowing our kids' baseline, knowing what they're capable of. We would never ask someone to do something way beyond their capability. And so we may need to lower the bar a tiny bit, or I don't want to say lower it, kind of, make it a little flexible to get them back in the swing of things. It's very difficult, right? And that's on, if you'll see that on slide number 16, right? I'm not going to read through that, but as educators, you could read into that, parents, educators, adults, stakeholders in the community, knowing our student, knowing our kid, what they're capable of, their baseline, their disabilities or challenges, their different abilities, knowing ourselves. Here's the thing, the whole idea of compassion fatigue, caregiver burnout. We need to be aware of that because it's happened. It's happened with me. There are times when I am no good for my own children. And I have to really keep that in check and make sure that I have enough of a store of energy and focus to come in every day and work with 6, 7, 8 clients and parents. It's very difficult. So knowing ourselves, right? And this is a recipe for burnout. My big mantra, no rush, take a deep breath. Guess what, folks? As far as I can tell, there's no rush in this. We have no deadline for much of anything. And I'd rather our kids take it gradually and get back into the swing of things gradually than try to run at the pace we were running at 12, 18 months ago. We're not there. We're not there.
For kids who might not have transitioned yet back, this is the time maybe to do a slow
absolutely
exposure to some of the things. Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? Teachers, administrators, coaches, I work with an arts organization here that does acting classes and musical theater. They're doing the same thing. Some of the kids are virtual and coming slowly back. And and folks have been working their tail off to try to I don't want to say perfect, but optimize how to do that, right? But they're willing to work with us. So it's got to be gradual. If you want to go to slide number 17, and that's one of my favorites. And
we are at 12:54. So
okay. So this is the last one, I will say. And so what about us, right? What about us? We cannot be of any help to our kids if we have nothing left. As we've said, I don't know who's been on a plane most recently, but affix your kids. There's a kid with their life vest. Put your kid's life vest on. I mean, you put yours on before you put your kids on, because you can't help your kids if you don't have yours on, right? We got to know our limits. We cannot be our kids' only authority figures and role models. We need to look well beyond ourselves. Again, it takes a village and beyond a village. We got to be creatively collaborative and mentoring. Okay, I am a huge fan of mentoring. I helped start a mentoring program up here at Teague about 16 years ago, and we are now expanding to working with kids. I say that figuratively, from the ages of, again, 18 to like 30, because they need it. And the mentoring is crucial now. Anyone we can look to give them some mentoring, some leadership, some role modeling is absolutely key. So I'll stop there.
There's a lot of discussion at the state right now about mentoring for kids, especially kids who have not been connected. So for anybody on the call that might look for a mentor, let us know and we'll try to help you identify the different mentoring programs throughout the state. Because it's a lot of our families, I can hear the voices saying, not for my kid. It's going to be really hard to find a mentor for my kid, but we can try to help. So yeah. It's a great idea.
Surprised.
Maybe your kid's mentor is your neighbor or their uncle or their cousin. Maybe it's not somebody from the general community because your child has different needs. But I think I really heard the point is it needs to be someone other than you for a bit.
Absolutely.
All the time.
And one of our folks just chatted, the different types of self-care. I'm trying to find a better phrase than self-care because it sounds so self-indulgent, but I can't yet. So we're going to talk about self-care. Again, emotional, we're talking about spending time with our loved ones as far as it's safe, things that keep us physically engaged, reading, yoga, anything that kind of that keeps us that works kind of with our natural sensibilities. Some people find it very difficult to meditate and to do yoga physically can be very demanding, but reading as well, going for a walk, being in a reflective garden, doing a labyrinth, anything of that nature, reflective reading or prayer.
Breathing.
Breathing, absolutely. Breathing is the most, as I cough, most underrated. When I tell kids, okay, we're going to do breathing now, they're like, I know how to breathe. What are you talking about? No, they don't, because they'll breathe in short spurts, and that's not good for our brain. It's not good for our body. But that's a great point. There are many different kinds of self-care, and we need to be able to sit down, no rush, take our time and say, okay, what can I do, right? That can help me be available for my kids. So anyway, wondering if there are any kind of reflections or questions or thoughts, because I know that was a mouthful. We could have done easily 2 hours on this. And actually, if anyone wants the PowerPoint, you can just ask. I mean, you have it on your computer. Yeah, you can have it. I don't care. And it's also, there's also like 10 more slides that you'll find interesting on it. So
let us know if you want it. Reach out to CPAC. Are there any, if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have questions before we close off. And this video will be the link will be sent to you, and it will be sent to everyone who registered that did not attend as well. And it should be up on YouTube. I don't know when, but shortly. I'd say, we usually edit the beginning a little bit and then get it up there. So within the next few days, when the link is ready, we will send it to everyone.
Excellent. Yeah. And any questions, and if you want any questions funneled to me later on, that's fine. I'll be in touch and I can answer whatever, and if I don't have the answer, I can tell you where to go for it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything. So because I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute.
Okay.
then we can really see if there's any last minute anything. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today, and please feel free to reach out to CPAC. I saw someone put the number in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you.
See you. Have a great day. Be well.